Okay, I want you to imagine a photograph. It's probably a bit grainy, maybe a little overexposed, the kind you'd see in a local newspaper from the early 2000s.
Right, a community feature piece.
Exactly. And in the center, there's this young woman in a wheelchair. She's frail, she's pale, and she looks so much younger than she really is.
Almost doll-like.
Yes, like a porcelain doll. And she's bald, so she's wearing a whimsical hat, maybe a Disney character beanie or something. A feeding tube is visible, an oxygen tank is usually somewhere in the frame.
It's the perfect image of vulnerability, isn't it? It's a picture that's designed to bypass your critical thinking and go straight for the heart.
It is. And right there beside her is her mother. Devoted, tireless, the absolute picture of maternal sacrifice. They are the darlings of their community.
Charities adored them. Neighbors felt protective. You see that chair, you see that tube, and you just want to help. It's almost a biological imperative.
Exactly. But now I want you to take that mental photograph and just burn it. Because the reality behind that image, it wasn't tragedy, it was a horror movie. And the sick child in that chair, well, she wasn't sick. She wasn't really a child. And by June of 2015, she was a co-conspirator in a brutal, premeditated murder.
It's a case that just fundamentally redefines the phrase, things are not always what they appear. It forces you to ask how much of what we see, especially in these feel-good stories, is just performance.
We are, of course, talking about the saga of Dee Dee and Gypsy-Rose Blanchard. And I know what you might be thinking, oh, I saw the headlines, or maybe I watched the act on Hulu years ago.
You probably know the broad strokes.
Right. But today, we are not just retelling the story. We're doing a deep dive into the mechanics of this deception. We're going to unpack how this lie was built, how it was maintained for over 2 decades.
And we're going to look at that timeline leading up to the murder in really granular detail, because that's where you see the psychology shift from, victimhood to calculation. It wasn't a sudden snap.
No, it was a slow, pressurized evolution. Plus, we have the benefit of hindsight. It's early 2026. Gypsy has been out of prison for over 2 years now. We have the full picture, from the fraud in Louisiana all the way to recent updates about her life as a mother.
Which, and we'll get into this later, brings a whole new scientific dimension to the story. The genetic component of this case, the one Dee Dee used as her foundation, has finally been put to the test in the next generation.
And the results are incredibly revealing. So our mission today is to really understand the how. How do you fake a terminal illness for 20 years? What is the breaking point that turns a victim into a killer?
And what happens when the performance finally ends?
We've got a stack of sources here. Court testimonies, investigation reports, media coverage right up to this month, February 2026. So let's start at the beginning.
Or really, the foundation. Because you don't just wake up one day and decide to fool an entire community. You have to build that reality, brick by brick.
Right. The architecture of the lie. And this didn't start in Missouri, where the murder happened. This story begins way back in Louisiana. Gypsy was born in 1991, and almost immediately, Dee Dee starts spinning the narrative.
And it's crucial to understand she was a master of narrative control.
Yeah.
If you look at the early reporting, there's a piece from the Slidell Sentry News from back in 2003. You can see the blueprint being drawn right there.
I have it here. The headline is, Life Takes Many Turns for Good for Little Girl in Slidell. Just the headline alone sets the tone, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's pure sympathy bait.
In the article, Dee Dee claims they were abandoned by their family after her own mother died. She says they bounced around for years, even lived in their car twice.
And that's a key strategic move. Claiming abandonment isolates them. It explains why there are no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents dropping by to say, hey, wait a minute, Gypsy was walking just fine last
You're
week.
controlling the history aggressively.
And she frames their survival on charity. She mentions the Children's Wish Endowment, sending them to Disney World. This wasn't just about getting help. It was about getting public validation for their story.
It became a lifestyle, didn't it? They were becoming, and I don't mean this to sound callous, but professional victims. Their whole existence depended on the benevolence of others.
It did. They got involved with Habitat for Humanity early on. And then there was the Ully Foundation, which is a wonderful organization that advocates for people with feeding tubes. They named Gypsy their Child of the Year in 2007.
Wow. That's a massive endorsement.
It's huge. When an organization like that validates you, it acts as a shield. It's social proof. Who's going to question the Child of the Year? If you're a local doctor, are you going to be the cynic who accuses this saintly, struggling mother of lying?
No way. You're going to write the check. You're going to bake the casserole. She built a fortress of goodwill around them that was almost impossible to breach.
And then, in 2005, nature handed her the perfect tool to reinforce that fortress.
Hurricane Katrina.
Exactly. For someone running a long con based on falsified medical history, a disaster like that is a gift. It's terrible, of course, but it destroys records. It displaces people. It creates chaos where people are just inclined to help without asking for paperwork.
So their home in Louisiana is destroyed. They end up moving first to Aurora, Missouri, and then to Springfield. And because of their story, single mom, disabled daughter, Katrina refugee, the community just rolls out the red carpet.
They do. Habitat for Humanity builds them a custom home on the north side of Springfield.
A custom home with a wheelchair ramp and even a hot tub for therapy.
It wasn't just housing. It was a stage set for the performance. And that move to a new state is so important. It allowed Dee Dee to completely reset the medical narrative. She could walk into a new doctor's office and say, oh, her records were all lost in the storm.
And then she gets to dictate the entire history herself. She becomes the primary source.
And because she was so good at it, she used the right jargon. She knew the drug interactions. Doctors trusted her. They saw a highly competent, involved parent.
It's the tabula rasa effect, a blank slate. She gets to write the chart from scratch. But it wasn't just her words. The physical enforcement of the lie. That's what's truly disturbing.
The visual cues. You have to make the child look sick.
Right. So Dee Dee would regularly shave Gypsy's head.
And her explanation was just, it was so manipulative. She'd tell Gypsy, your medication is going to make your hair fall out anyway, so let's just shave it off to be neat.
It's preemptive gaslighting. It tells the child, you are broken before a symptom even appears.
Then you add the props. The oxygen tank that wasn't needed, the feeding tube. We know now that Gypsy was being fed Pediasure, a nutritional supplement for children, well into her 20s.
Which would physically stunt her growth and keep her looking small and frail. It reinforced the lie that she was younger than she was. It's like she was bonsaiing her own daughter.
That's a very disturbing but very accurate analogy. And speaking of age, that was the other pillar of the lie's architecture. Dee Dee forged Gypsy's birth certificate.
She changed the birth year from 1991 to 1995.
Just like that. She shaved 4 years off her daughter's life.
Can you even imagine that? For 14 years, from the time she was a teenager, Gypsy literally did not know how old she was. She thought she was a minor when she was in her early 20s.
Think about the psychological impact of that. Your identity is anchored in time.
Yeah.
If you don't know your age, you don't know your place in the world. You are a perpetual child.
It arrested her development, not just physically with the Pediasure, but socially, mentally. It kept her completely dependent. If you think you're 15, you don't think you can just pack a bag and walk out the door.
You think the police will just bring you right back. It's total absolute control.
But even in a prison that's built just for you, you start to find the cracks in the wall. The human spirit is stubborn. And for Gypsy, that crack, oddly enough, was sci-fi conventions.
It actually makes perfect sense if you look at the psychology of those spaces.
Okay, explain that. Why sci-fi conventions? Why not the library or the local park?
Well, conventions are spaces of fantasy, of costume, of acceptance. In a big convention hall, a wheelchair isn't necessarily a medical tragedy. It could be part of a character's costume, or it's just ignored because everyone's looking at the person dressed as a Klingon.
So she could blend in.
She could blend in. She could wear a costume and feel powerful, be a hero for a day. It was a space where she could escape the role of sick girl.
She'd been attending them since 2001, but in 2011 there was a major incident. This was the first real sign of rebellion, wasn't it? The first tremor before the earthquake.
It was. At a convention, Gypsy tried to make a run for it. She had met a man online, which is a recurring theme, we'll see, and arranged to meet him at the hotel. She managed to get away from Dee Dee.
But Dee Dee found them in the hotel room, and this is where Dee Dee weaponized her own lies. She didn't just scream at Gypsy.
No, she was much smarter than that. She pulled out that forged birth certificate, the one saying Gypsy was born in 1995, and she showed it to the man and to the police. She threatened to have him arrested for taking a minor across state lines.
Oh, that is evil genius.
Isn't it? She used the lie to enforce the imprisonment. It taught Gypsy a terrifying lesson. The law is on my mother's side. The truth on paper says I belong to her. It made escape seem legally impossible.
It basically told her, no one will ever believe you over me.
Exactly.
Now, we should probably clarify the actual medical reality here, because this is where things get a bit complex. Dee Dee's go-to explanation, especially to Gypsy's father, Rod, was that Gypsy had a chromosomal defect.
Which is a brilliant term to use because it sounds very serious and scientific, but it's also very vague. It can explain away a whole host of symptoms, and it just shuts down questions. It's genetic is a conversation ender.
But there was a tiny grain of truth to it, wasn't there? A grain that she twisted beyond all recognition.
Yes. Genetic testing was done in 2011, the same year as that failed escape attempt. And it did identify a condition. It's called a 1q21.1 microdeletion.
Okay, let's break that down for people who aren't geneticists. What does that actually mean?
It's a chromosomal change, where a very tiny piece of chromosome 1 is missing. But, and this is the most critical part, it's generally a very specific, often minor genetic marker. It can be associated with some developmental delays or mild physical issues, but it can also present with no symptoms at all.
So it's absolutely not the terminal, wheelchair-bound, needs a feeding tube and oxygen kind of condition that Dee Dee was portraying.
Not even close.
Yeah.
She took a clinical footnote and turned it into the headline of their entire life. She used the complexity of genetics to confuse everyone. She could say, see, the test proves something is wrong, and then she would just fill in all the blanks with her own made-up symptoms.
So by 2014, Gypsy is completely trapped.
Yeah.
She's physically monitored, medically abused, legally infantilized by the fake birth certificate. But she had one window to the outside world that Dee Dee couldn't completely board up.
The internet.
The digital double life. This is where the story really shifts from passive victim to active planner.
The internet is the only place Gypsy can be her actual age. It's the only place she can explore her sexuality. It's the only place she has any real agency.
And what's so fascinating is that Dee Dee knew it was a threat. She tried to stop it. At one point, she physically destroyed Gypsy's laptop and phone with a hammer.
But Gypsy was resourceful. She'd wait until Dee Dee was asleep. She created multiple Facebook accounts under different names. She was basically running a covert intelligence operation from her own bedroom.
And she wasn't just, passively surfing the web. She was building relationships. She started talking to her neighbor, a young woman named Aaliyah Woodmansee.
And that relationship is so heartbreaking in hindsight. Aaliyah was 23. Gypsy was actually around the same age, maybe a year or so younger, but Aaliyah thought she was talking to a teenager.
Right. Aaliyah thought she was being a kind of big sister figure, giving advice to this sheltered, sick kid. Meanwhile, Gypsy is confiding in her about eloping and baby names and all these adult desires.
She was role-playing a normal life with girl next door. It shows how desperate she was for a peer, for someone to see her as the woman she actually was.
And then, in 2012, on a Christian singles website of all places, she meets Nicholas Godejohn.
The secret boyfriend. And this wasn't a whirlwind romance. This went on for years.
No, it was a slow burn.
That's
They communicated secretly for about 2 years. They built this entire fantasy world together online with special names for each other, different personas. It was an escape.
It was. And this is really important for you to understand. They tried to do this the right way first, or at least a non-violent way.
You're talking about Plan A.
Yes. In early 2015, Gypsy arranged for Nick to travel all the way from Wisconsin to Springfield. The plan was to stage a chance encounter at a movie theater. They'd meet, he'd be charming, and maybe, just maybe, Dee Dee would approve of him.
But Gypsy testified later that it, and I'm quoting here, didn't go well at all.
It failed miserably. Dee Dee was not having it. She likely sensed a threat to her control. Dee Dee was incredibly perceptive when it came to anything that might loosen her grip on Gypsy.
And when Plan A fails and you feel like your life is impossible, you start considering Plan B.
Which brings us to June of 2015, the act itself. And we have to be really clear about the premeditation here.
Yep.
This was not a snap decision in the heat of an argument.
No. According to Gypsy's own testimony, they had been discussing killing Dee Dee for about a year. It was a calculated exit strategy. They came to view Dee Dee not as a mother, but as a warden, an obstacle that had to be removed.
Gypsy later said she felt she had only 2 choices: stay there and eventually die from the abuse, or kill her mother and get out.
So let's walk through the timeline of those few days. June 10th, 2015, Nicholas Godejohn returns to Springfield.
He arrives while Gypsy and Dee Dee are at a doctor's appointment, of all things. The irony is just palpable. They're at the very place that reinforces the lie while the man who's going to end the charade is waiting in a motel nearby.
They come home, Dee Dee goes to sleep, and then Gypsy makes the move. She lets him in the house.
And she doesn't just open the door. She is an active participant. She provides the tools for the crime. She gives him duct tape, gloves, and a knife from the kitchen.
She was the logistics manager. She knew the layout of the house. She knew her mother's sleep patterns. She knew where everything was.
That detail, her handing him the weapon, is just chilling. But then, as he goes into the bedroom, she retreats. She goes and hides in the bathroom.
And she covers her ears. She testified that she didn't want to hear her mother scream. It's this moment of profound dissociation. She set the entire machine in motion, but she couldn't bear to watch the gears actually turn.
She wanted the result, but not the process. She wanted the mother gone, but she couldn't face the brutal reality of the violence required to make that happen.
Nick Godejohn stabbed Dee Dee multiple times in the back while she slept. It was brutal. And the immediate aftermath is where the innocent, manipulated child narrative just completely dissolves for investigators later.
Right. They didn't flee immediately in a panic. They stayed in the house. They had sex in Gypsy's bedroom.
In the house, with her mother's body just down the hall.
It speaks to a level of compartmentalization that is hard to fathom. Or maybe, for Gypsy, the jailer was finally gone, and that house was finally hers. It was an act of claiming ownership over her own body and her own space.
After that, the practicalities kicked in. They stole about $4,400 in cash.
Which, ironically, was mostly from child support checks that Dee Dee had been hoarding for years. Money that was technically meant for Gypsy's care anyway.
And then they made a very calculated move. They mailed the knife to Godejohn's home in Wisconsin.
That shows significant forensic awareness, right?
Yeah.
They were thinking about avoiding metal detectors or searches on the bus. They weren't just running blind, they were covering their tracks.
They took a Greyhound bus to Wisconsin, and there were witnesses at the bus station who saw something that would later become a crucial piece of evidence.
They saw Gypsy-Rose Blanchard, the girl who supposedly needed a wheelchair, the girl who couldn't eat solid food, wearing a blonde wig and walking perfectly, unassisted.
That's the moment. That's the visual proof that the entire disability was a performance. The moment the curtain fell, she just stood up and walked away.
But back in Springfield, nobody knew that yet. The community was starting to panic. And not because they suspected murder, their brains couldn't even go there.
No, they thought a helpless, disabled girl had been kidnapped.
And then came the Facebook post. This is one of the most famous pieces of digital evidence in modern true crime history. A status update appears on the joint Facebook account Dee Dee and Gypsy shared.
It just said, "That bitch is dead."
So jarring.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up comment that was even more graphic and disturbing. It was designed to shock.
But why? Why post that? Why draw attention directly to the crime scene?
Gypsy later explained it. She wanted the body to be found. She knew she couldn't call the police herself, so she used Facebook like a digital flare gun. She needed the discovery to happen so the whole ordeal could finally be over.
And it worked. Friends and neighbors saw it. They were horrified. They rushed to the little pink house. And the scene they describe is just so eerie. The modified van is still in the driveway. The windows are covered so you can't see in.
A fortress of secrets. A neighbor eventually climbs through a window. The house seems undisturbed. The wheelchairs are there. The feeding formulas are on the counter. But Dee Dee and Gypsy are gone.
When police finally get a warrant and they find Dee Dee's body, the community's reaction is just pure fear for Gypsy. They're thinking, oh my God, Gypsy is sick. She doesn't have her medication. She doesn't have her oxygen. She's been taken by the maniac who killed her mother.
They set up a GoFundMe page. They were raising money for her rescue, and they assumed her mother's funeral expenses. That is how deep the deception ran. They were mourning the victim while she was hundreds of miles away in a motel with her boyfriend.
The narrative Dee Dee built was so strong, it held up even after her death. But the unraveling happened fast, and it came from that digital trail.
Aaliyah Woodmansee, the neighbor, she went straight to the police. She had printed out all her secret online conversations with Gypsy. She told him everything she knew about the secret boyfriend from Wisconsin. She gave him a name.
Nicholas Godejohn.
And that one name was all they needed. That allowed the police to trace the IP address of those shocking Facebook posts.
And it pinged directly to a home in Big Bend, Wisconsin.
The Godejohn home. Police raid the house. Gypsy and Nick surrender without a fight. And this is the moment the world, or at least the world in Springfield, Missouri, turned completely upside down.
The Greene County Sheriff, Jim Arnott, holds a press conference, and he says this one line that I think gave everyone who heard it absolute goosebumps. He said, "Things are not always what they appear."
And he had to deliver that bombshell. He had to tell a community that had poured years of time, money, and love into this family that it was all based on a lie. He revealed that Gypsy was not sick, she could walk, and just like that, the kidnapping victim became the prime suspect.
The fraud investigation opened up. And the term Munchausen by proxy started to circulate. It wasn't just a murder anymore. It was a lifetime of systematic abuse that had culminated in a violent, desperate act.
Which brings us to the justice phase. And this was so tricky from a legal standpoint. You have a premeditated, cold-blooded murder on one hand, but on the other, you have a defendant who was a victim of horrific, documented abuse.
Our legal system isn't always great at handling that much gray area.
Not at all. The charges reflected that complexity. Initially, it was first-degree murder for both of them, but the state had to weigh the years of coercion. They looked at the medical fraud, the psychological torture.
And in the end, Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She was given a 10-year sentence.
Which you have to understand is incredibly light for matricide. Historically, you kill your mother, you're likely going away for life. That 10-year sentence was the legal system's way of acknowledging that she was, in many ways, acting in a kind of imperfect self-defense against a slow-motion attack on her life.
But Nicholas Godejohn, he wasn't so lucky.
No. He was found guilty of first-degree murder. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years.
The disparity is striking.
It is. The jury clearly saw him as the instrument of death. He was the adult male who physically committed the act. He didn't have the powerful mitigation of being Dee Dee's direct abuse victim for 2 decades. The system essentially decided that Gypsy was desperate, but Nick was the one who was willing to be the weapon.
So Gypsy goes to prison. But unlike most prisoners, her story doesn't just fade away. It explodes into the culture.
Oh, completely. The act on Hulu, the HBO documentary. It became a true crime phenomenon.
And Gypsy herself became a public figure from behind bars. She was giving interviews, building a following. It was a strange sort of celebrity.
It was. Now, let's fast forward to the recent past, December 28th, 2023. After serving 85% of her sentence, Gypsy is released on parole.
And this is where we get into the life after lockup segment. The transition was instantaneous. She went from a prison cell one day to being on Good Morning America and The View the next.
It was a full-on media blitz. She immediately started filming a reality show for Lifetime. She was everywhere. And you have to think of the psychological pressure of that. You go from one controlled environment, your mother's house, to another prison, to a third, which is the glare of the public eye.
She's never really known a private life, has she? A life without an audience.
Never. And her personal life was a roller coaster right out of the gate. She had married a man named Ryan Anderson in 2022 while she was still incarcerated.
But that didn't last long on the outside.
No. By April 2024, they were separated and filing for divorce. It's not uncommon for prison marriages to falter under the pressures of real life, and hers was under a media microscope.
But here's the update that I think really truly closes the circle on the original medical mystery. We're in 2026 now. Gypsy has moved on. She has a baby daughter. Her name is Aurora.
And this is the scientific clincher to the whole story. In April of 2025, there was significant news regarding the baby. There was this lingering fear, a fear that was intentionally planted by Dee Dee's lies, that Gypsy's conditions were genetic and could be passed down.
Right, the fear that this tragedy could repeat itself in the next generation.
Exactly. But the genetic testing came back, and Gypsy announced her profound relief that her daughter, Aurora, did not inherit the 1q21.1 microdeletion.
Wow. So what does that confirm scientifically?
It confirms 2 critical things. One, that the microdeletion was real. It was a genetic marker that Gypsy did in fact carry. Dee didn't invent that part.
Okay.
But 2, and this is far more important, the fact that Gypsy is living a healthy adult life and her child is perfectly healthy proves that the genetic marker was never the catastrophe Dee Dee claimed it was. It wasn't a death sentence. It wasn't a reason for a wheelchair or a feeding tube.
It's the final definitive proof that it was all theater. It wasn't biology driving this. It was a script written by Dee Dee.
Cruel, dangerous, and ultimately fatal theater.
So, after all of this, what's the big takeaway? We've walked through the architecture of the lie, the murder, the justice, and the aftermath. We've seen a young woman go from a sick child to a murderer to a free mother.
I think it's a story about the pliability of truth. Dee Dee proved that if you tell a lie with enough conviction and you back it up with the right props and the right narrative, people will believe you. Because, fundamentally, people want to believe in the goodness of a struggling mother. She hacked our collective empathy.
We're wired to trust our eyes. We see a wheelchair. We assume disability.
We don't account for the person who would use that trust as a weapon.
And now, Gypsy is living her life, but she's doing it in front of cameras again. First, she was performing for her mother. Now she's performing for an audience of millions on social media and reality TV.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought, I think. Has she ever truly owned her own narrative? She performed illness for her mother for 20 years. Now she performs freedom and redemption for us.
That's a haunting thought to end on. Is the performance ever really over?
Or is she just finally getting to write her own script for the very first time? I suppose that's for you to decide.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's a heavy one, but a really important one.
It is indeed. Keep questioning what you see.